Well, I'm glad you can join again in our study of the Gospel of Matthew. Welcome to the deck out behind my house. You can see some smoke passing in front of me here. We're right out here by the fire pit, so I thought you might enjoy meeting here today. I'm sorry I can't get the fire pit in the video, but if we would have to move way back, and it wouldn't work. Anyway, just take my word for it. There's a nice warm fire here, so you can warm your hands over it if you want to. But we're going to be talking about Matthew's Gospel. We kind of covered an overview of the Sermon on the Mount so we wouldn't conflict with the upcoming preaching that Brother Les Ferguson is going to do at the Oxford Church of Christ on that great discourse. But by way of review, I want to just look back and make one suggestion for you in your study of the Sermon on the Mount, and that is to take those 8 great characteristics that are given in the Beatitudes in chapter 5, verses about, 3 through 9 there, something like that, 3 through 10, 3 through 12. It's 3 through 12. Now I got it right. For the Beatitudes, and kind of make a list of those things, or actually make a list. And then as you encounter each teaching in the sermon, ask yourself, if I could develop these characteristics, how would it help me to fulfill this teaching? For example, Jesus speaks very strongly. He says, the Old Testament says don't murder. Well, I'm going to tell you here that it's just not murder, it's when you're angry with your brother, or when you use a term of contempt, use the Aramaic term raka, or when you call him a fool. He said you're endangering your soul when you do that. So you say, well, suppose I'm really poor in spirit. I have this feeling of sinful humility, neediness. I have nothing to offer on my own. I'm broke spiritually. I need God's help. Or if I'm full of mercy, how's that going to help me to deal with somebody that makes me angry? With someone who I feel is obviously inferior, that I feel is acting or is in fact a fool. Is it going to want me to unload on them verbally, or is it going to give me some pause and help me to be more Christ-like? If I hunger and thirst for righteousness, so I'm pure in heart, is that going to help me resist, lust that leads to sexual immorality and adultery? So this sort of a study, I think, where we take these general principles and apply them to specific areas of life as we work through the sermon, I think can be quite profitable for all of us. So I commend that to you. At any rate, having passed through rather rapidly chapters 5, 6, and 7, it brings us to Matthew chapter 8 today. So we're going to look at this section 8 and 9. It's a rather well-structured block before we get to Jesus' next great speech in chapter 10. This block 8 and 9 contains 3 groups, each containing 3 miracles, and there are a total of 10 miracles. And you say, wait a minute, we got a math mistake here. 3 times 3 is 9. You just said 10. Well, in fact, one of the miracle stories, there's a miracle within the miracle story, so that makes, you get 2 for the price of 1. That makes 10. So these 3 groups are separated by 2 shorter blocks of teaching, and it shows Jesus' mastery over sin, disease, and nature. So let's just read the first group of 3 in the beginning of chapter 8. When Jesus came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out his hand and said, "I am willing. Be clean." Immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. And then Jesus said to him, "See that you don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them." When Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him asking for help. "Lord," he said, "my servant lies at home, paralyzed, suffering terribly." And Jesus said, "Shall I come and heal him?" The centurion replied, "Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. But just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed, and said to those following him, truly I tell you, I have not found anyone with such great faith in all Israel. I say to you that many will come from the east and the west, and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then Jesus said to the centurion, go, let it be done just as you believed it would. And his servant was healed at that moment. When Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up and began to wait on him. When evening came, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him, and he drove out the spirits with a word and healed all the sick. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. He took up our infirmities and bore our diseases. Well, this first group of three, it's interesting to note the people that were impacted by Jesus' miracles. There is a leper, a Roman soldier and his servant, and Peter's mother-in-law. In all three cases, Jesus breaks through a barrier between a rabbi, a Jewish man, and people on the other side. Lepers were specifically excluded from social contact. You just stayed away from lepers. You didn't touch lepers. It was like having COVID, only worse. It was a lifetime thing. You just were shut off. Centurions were Roman soldiers, which means they were pagans, which means they were hated. You just didn't have contact with these Gentiles. Jesus offered to go to the guy's house. You just didn't go inside their house because there's all sorts of unclean, impure stuff inside their house. And if you were a Jewish man, a faithful Jewish man, faithful to the law, you didn't touch women unless it was your wife, maybe your baby girl daughter, maybe your mother, but other women, you just didn't touch them. And so even in public, there was kind of a segregation between men and women, because men just didn't even want a casual you just didn't touch women because they could be unclean, because and you just didn't want to touch them. But he touches Peter's mother-in-law's hand in order to heal her. So he's breaking across barriers. I'd like to say one other thing about these miracles that we're going to encounter, these 10 miracles. And it ties back into something I was talking about Wednesday night, if you picked up that lesson, or you could go back and listen to the video if you want to. There's an idea today that, church is kind of on the out, but the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, is this great force for good in the world that's going to transform the world. And I guess I object to the separation of the idea of church and kingdom. I don't think they're perfectly synonymous, but I think I think they're intrinsically involved with each other. But here's the point: Jesus' miracles were targeted at creating belief, at creating faith, and Matthew selects and recounts miracles in a way to promote our faith and promote our belief. Just like John said, Jesus did a whole bunch of things I'm not going to write. I didn't have room to write down, but I selected these so that you may believe. Jesus didn't heal all the sick people that were in his reach, in his country, in his region while he was alive. Jesus did not feed all the hungry people, And so when we engage in good works, and that's commendable, and I'm all in favor of that. I'm involved in that. My pocketbook's involved in that, okay? But at some point in time, there needs to be some room for disciple making and the works that we do should bring credibility to our message. Now, this is really foreign to a lot of people's thinking nowadays. It's let's not try to spread our doctrine. Let's just go, hug the orphans. But that's fine if that's what you want to do. But let's not say that's Christianity, because what Jesus did was he did good in order to pave the way for his message. See if you look at the gospel objectively and see if you don't agree with me. If you disagree, tell me. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'd like to hear about it. So this problem of leprosy, Jesus encounters this guy. He falls on his knees. He says, "Lord, if you are willing," he didn't say if you're willing, you can heal me, did he? No, I think what he said was, if you're willing, you can make me clean. You can make me clean. And it talks about Jesus cleansing the leper, not healing the leper. And so this shows the tight relationship in that culture between sin and disease. And in some cases, I think it was mistaken. I think just because a person is sick or is physically impaired, it doesn't necessarily mean they were sinful. And this point is made in John chapter 9. They find a guy who's born blind. And they said, who sinned? This guy or his parents said he was born blind. And Jesus didn't say, well, it's all about genetics and recessive genes and all this sort of stuff and, birth defects and it's bad. And he said, no. He says, this man was born blind, but nobody sinned. He was born blind so that the works of God might be made manifest in his life. So there is a link, I think, between our physical wholeness and our spiritual wholeness, especially in this case. Leprosy is a disease that today we use that word to refer to something called Hansen's disease, which is a bacterial infection. It can be terrible, but it's controlled in most of the world today. In the Bible, it seems to refer to contagious skin diseases. And there's, in fact, if you have the NIV, there's a footnote. It says the Greek word traditionally translated leprosy was used for various diseases affecting the skin. That doesn't tell you a whole lot. And what if you dig a little deeper, you'll find there's a lot of discussion among scholars about exactly what leprosy was, Old Testament and New Testament. But the Jewish law was very clear. If you get leprosy and you're certified as a leper, you have to be isolated. It's not just 14 days like, COVID, or 10 days, or whatever your COVID quarantine is. I mean, it's until you are certified as cured. You are to stay away from others. And if other people get close to you, you're to announce to them, unclean, unclean, so they can stay away. You don't say infected, you say unclean, okay? Because you are spiritually contaminated. So you're not supposed to touch a leper, but what does Jesus do? He says, if you're willing, you can make it. Jesus says, I'm willing, and he touched the leper. Boy, what an example for Christians. He touched the leper. Because, quite frankly, as Christian disciples, more often than we would like, we are confronted with people who have a lot of problems, who have messy lives, who are hopeless cases, who mentally, emotionally, legally, physically, financially, they are messed up. They're messed up, and it makes us just want to retreat, just want to, smile and get out of there. These people are needy, and they're just going to glom onto us, and pull us down, and they're just. But Jesus touched the leper. Now here's the neat thing: when he touched the leper, it didn't make Jesus a leper. No. The power went the other direction. It made the leper clean. Now, throughout the Old Testament, the rules are, you don't touch the leper. If you touch the leper, then you're unclean, okay? But no, the voltage goes in the other direction with Jesus. Shazam, isn't this something great? Then Jesus said, don't tell anybody about this, and that's really kind of strange, because I just made this long discourse about Jesus worked miracles to, spread his message, build credibility, not just kind of tell anybody. What is it here? Well, secrecy is a part of Jesus' ministry early on. And it's pretty obvious why when you get to the end of the story, when things get more open, and the news starts spreading, that's when he gets killed. Okay, so there's a reason for this. He does tell him to comply with the law of Moses and to go offer the gift that Moses commands. So if you're a leper and you think you're well, you go to the priest, and the priest examines you and says, yeah, I think you're well, and then you have to go through these steps. You have to shave all the hair off your body and bathe, and you have to be outside the camp for another 7 days, and then you offer this beautiful sacrifice, these 2 doves. And one of them you hold over water and you kill, and his blood falls into the water. And you take some of that blood and you put it on the second dove, and then this is in Leviticus, I think 32. You can read it yourself. You take that second dove out to a field and you let him fly free. And then there's some other offerings you have to make too. It's a big deal to be cured of leprosy, and Jesus told the guy to go through with this. Then the next episode we have is this centurion comes up. Now, I really like to take Matthew on his own, to keep him standalone. So I try to not always constantly referring to the other Gospels, but there's something important about this same, it appears to be the exact same story in Capernaum, in Luke. And in Luke's account, the Jewish elders of the town come with the centurion and they tell Jesus, this guy loves our nation and he built our synagogue, and you really ought to help him out. What's significant about that? Well, you don't find a lot of Roman soldiers building synagogues back then, okay? And you sure don't find a Jewish elder saying, this is a good guy. Remarkable person, but the really neat thing about it, and I think maybe our guest speaker last Sunday at the Oxford Church of Christ, Brother Everett Hufford, talked about this some. Today you can go to Capernaum, and the ruins of the synagogue are there. Now, archaeologists say that these ruins are from after the time of Jesus, several hundred years, 300, 400, 500 years after the time of Christ, 300 or 400 years after the time of Christ. But there are some stones in the foundation that evidently are from an earlier structure that was built on the same spot. And maybe those stones were paid for by this same centurion that built their synagogue. This guy, this is kind of strange. In the New Testament, we run into 3, 4, 5 centurions. They're all good guys. And so he says, you don't have to come to my house, Jesus. I know you're a Jewish man, and so I don't even deserve it. Now, there's somebody that's poor in spirit. Rome is the mightiest army in the world, okay? And, they don't take second to anybody. And this guy's not just a Roman soldier. He's a centurion. He's a commander of 100. He's like a captain in the U.S. Army. He says, if you'll just say the word, I believe that you've got the power, that you've got the authority to heal this guy. And Jesus is amazed. Now, I looked, and the word amazed comes up in the Gospels a good bit, but it's always people that are amazed at something that Jesus says or does. This is the only time, you can check me, this is the only time anybody ever amazes Jesus. He says, this guy has so much faith. Now, Jesus is the kind of person that always evaluates people on the basis of faith. Have you ever had a friend, or maybe you've been this way a little bit, you evaluate people based upon the vehicle they drive, or the way they dress, or their hairstyle, or, how smart they are, or something. There's some way that you always evaluate people, I guess people say that, if you're a barber, you always check to see, what their haircut looks like, if you're an optometrist, you see what kind of glasses they wear, if you're, I don't know. Anyway, but Jesus is very focused on faith. And, if you had a lot of faith, according to Jesus, that's real good. If you don't have much faith, he told his disciples, said, you have little faith. I'm disappointed in you. You're nothing. But this guy has an amazing amount of faith. And so Jesus says, this guy's really, really impressive to me. And he offers a teaching that's very troubling, reflecting on this Gentile. He says, you know, when we have this big feast in the kingdom of heaven, many, he doesn't say how many, but he says many will come from the east and west and take their places at the feast with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. It ought to tell us a lot that Jesus' picture of heaven was a big old meal. A big old fellowship meal. Just sit down together. And Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are going to be there. You know, the patriarchs, the fathers of the faithful. And he said there's going to be a lot of people from the outside that are there. The Gentiles, the people that we don't think ought to be there, they're going to be there in places of honor with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob at this big meal in the kingdom of heaven. Then he says something really strange. He said the subjects of the kingdom are going to be thrown out. I say, wait a minute, if they're subjects of the kingdom, you're going to tell me they're not going to make it? Like I told you in the lesson on Wednesday about kingdom of heaven, about the time you think you've got it captured, then it goes away. So these subjects of the kingdom, they're going to be thrown out, and outside there's going to be darkness and weeping and gnashing of teeth. I don't want gnashing of teeth. Actually, I think it means gritting your teeth because it's painful. Now, one thing that Jesus keeps returning to, or the Matthew's gospel keeps returning to, and Jesus, is this concept of punishment. Very unpopular in religious circles today, in Christian circles. For example, if a preacher would like to get a new job, he just needs to preach a really good sermon on hell. And bingo, he'll lose that job, and he'll have to go find another job because people don't want to hear it. It's very unpopular, and frankly, it's something that makes us uncomfortable to think about there being some sort of eternal punishment for people that are not faithful. And when I bring this up, I want to say that in the past, I think people have used teaching about eternal punishment, about hell, to manipulate others. I think they've neglected the great theme of grace, the great doctrine of grace that runs throughout the New Testament. And if there's anything that I think the New Testament teaches is never, never, never underestimate God's grace. Never, never, never rule somebody out of heaven categorically. In fact, God never asked me to judge anybody one way or the other, but he says there are going to be some people that are cast out, that are thrown out. And some of these people think they're going to be in. Earlier in the book of Matthew, and these are listed on the handout if you choose to print out the handout, there are references to fire about in John the Baptist preaching. The axe is at the root of the trees, and he talks about the chaff will be burned with unquenchable fire. And in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, he talks about trees that don't bear fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire, and so forth and so on. The idea that there's going to be a reckoning and evaluation is very much a part of Jesus' teaching. And then finally, Jesus goes to Peter's house, and there is a place that's more or less venerated in Capernaum that people have said this is Peter's house. Who knows? And there he finds Peter's mother-in-law who's sick with a fever. He touches her and heals her, and I got to admire this woman. She gets up and begins to serve as soon as she's well. So that's a great thing. But while he's staying there, after the sun goes down, and maybe this is a Sabbath day, and you weren't supposed to move around and do stuff on Sabbath day, but after the sun goes down, it says that a lot of people come to him who are demon possessed. And it says he heals the people who are demon possessed and all of their sicknesses. So even though Jesus would like to, just relax in the evening there, there's a demand for him to come and heal these people We've talked some about this concept of demon possession, and we'll get into it more as we move through Matthew. Maybe this corresponds to what we have today for mental illness. So we have him healing some difficult cases here. The ancient rabbi said to heal a leper is just as difficult as to raise someone from the dead. It was presumably a lifetime, terminal, incurable disease. The centurion's servant was paralyzed, and we are still struggling with ways to treat paralysis. Through computers and other things, we're making a little bit of progress, but boy, it's a tough thing to deal with. Healing a mother-in-law is I'm not going to get into that. I had a really nice mother-in-law. I hope you do too. Anyway, so these are all very difficult cases to treat, and Jesus does them all. And then the demon possessed. And I've been with people who I've had dear loved ones who suffer with various kinds of mental illness and addiction, and I just thought, man, if I could just cast that demon out of them, wouldn't that be wonderful? But he does this, and so Matthew says, this is I guess he does so many times, a fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy by Matthew, and Matthew, by Isaiah, fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy by Isaiah. Isaiah 53. He took up our infirmities and bore our diseases. And it's important that Matthew is assuming that you and I know a little bit about the Old Testament. We said this was written for Jewish people, and they really knew the Old Testament. They didn't have chapters and verses, and Matthew could say, it's back there in Isaiah, and they say, oh yeah. Because the context of Isaiah 53, the famous suffering servant passage, is very important to consider this little snippet that he gives. And so on the second page of your handout, I have listed that. I just highlighted the little section that Matthew quotes here. And in this particular translation, it says, surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. But as we read a little bit further there, the context is for his atoning sacrifice of his life for our sins. It says, he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. By his wounds we are healed. So Matthew is saying this is more than just some nice stories about Jesus doing good deeds. It's a lot more than that. He's showing here his power and his mastery over sin, disease, nature, time, space, and he's building, we would say, his resume to deal with your sin and disease and time and space. He's showing that he has the power to get these things done. Well, that's our lesson for today, and I hope next week we can continue with this chapter 8 and 9 block. I covet your prayers as I pray for you. I hope that you will be well and grow stronger spiritually. I look forward to a time when we can resume our class in person.